My name's Haley, I'm 29, and until a few months ago, I worked as a senior project manager at a fast-growing tech startup called Virion Systems. I had been there nearly 5 years. I was employee number 16. When I first joined, we were working out of what was basically a glorified warehouse with half-broken HVAC, folding tables, and a coffee machine that exploded once a week. Everyone wore hoodies, we had daily stand-ups while sitting on the floor, and we shared 2 bathrooms with a CrossFit gym next door. It was chaotic. It was scrappy. And I loved it. I helped build that company from the ground up. I was the one who mapped out our first internal workflows, the one who patched together our first real project tracker in a desperate 3-day sprint, and the one who ran point on our earliest client onboarding. I worked weekends, pulled late nights, and even fielded calls on holidays because someone had to keep things from falling apart. In those early days, there was no, "That's not my job." Everything was everyone's job. And I threw myself into it completely. Over time, we grew. We landed solid contracts, brought in funding, upgraded offices, hell, we got real chairs. The team expanded. With each growth stage, I took on more, bigger clients, more cross-functional projects, team management, budgeting. I wore at least 6 hats at any given moment, and I made sure every project we shipped was delivered on time, under budget, and beyond expectations. My role wasn't about just moving things from A to B, I solved problems no one else even saw coming. Fast forward to earlier this year. Virion had over 200 employees, had just closed its Series B funding, and finalized a major multi-year contract with a massive logistics firm. I had spent 3 months leading that deal from the inside, sleepless nights, endless revisions, site visits, compliance audits, you name it. When it was finally signed, the client specifically named me in the closing call as the reason they felt confident in moving forward. So, I thought, this is the right time to have the conversation. I scheduled a meeting with our CEO, Brandon Keller, who was 37 and exactly the kind of guy you're picturing, fitted shirts, constantly checking his reflection in the window glass, and using phrases like "let's disrupt the disruptors." I came in prepared. I had documentation. I had metrics. I had proof. I explained that I was requesting a 15% raise, modest, considering market data showed I was underpaid even at my current level. I laid out the value I brought, the money I helped the company earn, the responsibilities I had accumulated without complaint. Brandon looked at me, leaned back in his overpriced ergonomic chair, and gave a smirk like I had just asked for his watch. He chuckled and said, "Ask someone else for that kind of money." Then he went on about how the company had to be strategic with compensation this year and how I should be grateful to even have a job in this economy. It was the word grateful that stuck with me. Like I should be honored to sacrifice my health, energy, and free time for the privilege of being underpaid. Like the blood, sweat, and weekends I poured into this company were just expected, owed, even. I left that meeting humiliated. I had always known Brandon had a smug streak, but this wasn't just dismissive, it was personal. I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking to be paid fairly. And he laughed at me. So I took his advice and asked someone else. That same day, after I got home, I opened LinkedIn and messaged Clara Nguyen. Clara is the vice president of operations at Arento Tech, one of our biggest competitors. We had met at a tech leadership conference in Austin last year. She gave a talk on scaling without losing culture, and I approached her afterward with questions. We talked over coffee, exchanged emails, and kept in touch casually, likes on posts, the occasional comment. She had messaged me a couple times to compliment project launches I had shared. Nothing serious, just professional mutual respect. I sent her a message thanking her for her past encouragement and saying I was starting to look for new opportunities. She replied within an hour, saying she was intrigued and asked if I could hop on a quick call the next day. I agreed. The call was less like an interview and more like a genuine conversation. She asked about my goals, my frustrations, what kind of work I loved doing. She told me that Arento Tech had been looking to expand their enterprise project team and that my name had actually come up a few weeks prior when they were reviewing potential candidates. She asked me to send over my resume and portfolio. 3 days later, I was in their downtown office for a formal interview. It felt like a different world. The vibe was focused but relaxed. The people I met were kind, thoughtful, and incredibly sharp. Clara walked me around herself. I could feel the difference in culture immediately. People weren't afraid to speak, laugh, or take a breath. 1 week after that, I had a written offer in hand. 30% more base salary. Full benefits that actually covered things. Stock options. A hybrid schedule. A professional development stipend. They even offered to match my tenure at Virion for vacation purposes, something I hadn't even thought to ask for. I accepted. But I didn't just hand in my resignation and walk out the door. See, I had helped build Virion's operational engine from the inside out. I had access to everything: client contracts, project timelines, vendor relationships, even partner onboarding docs. I had built many of them myself. I knew the pain points, the weak spots, the dependencies no one else had ever fully documented. I had been the glue. So I spent 2 weeks carefully documenting everything I could. Not out of loyalty to Brandon, but for the people I had worked alongside. I created handover manuals, cross-trained my direct reports, flagged upcoming bottlenecks. I made sure my projects wouldn't burn the minute I walked out. I also quietly disconnected myself from systems, revoked my own credentials, and ensured I took no proprietary data, just the experience and lessons I had earned. When I finally handed in my notice, I did it in person. Brandon didn't even hide his surprise. He asked, "Where are you going?" And I told him flatly, "Arento Tech." For the first time in years, he didn't have a snarky comment. His face went blank. He knew what that meant. I wasn't just leaving. I was joining the enemy. I was bringing 5 years of operational expertise to his competitor's doorstep. I left the office that day and never looked back. Then came the real fun. After I accepted Arento Tech's offer, I did exactly what I said I would. I gave Virion my 2-week notice, neatly typed and dated, handed directly to Brandon in his office. He barely looked up from his phone. He muttered something about how everyone thinks the grass is greener and not to expect a counteroffer. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what they offered. He didn't even ask what he could do to retain me. That moment cemented every suspicion I had harbored for months. I had been nothing but an asset to him, useful until I wasn't. And that was fine. Because what Brandon didn't understand, what he would never understand, was that I wasn't just leaving the company. I was taking something far more valuable than a signed resignation: knowledge. I had built Virion's project infrastructure from scratch. From our intake pipelines to our compliance checklist templates, I was the one who identified the gaps and built the bridges. I created scalable frameworks, streamlined our onboarding systems, wrote playbooks for customer success teams, and aligned technical teams with business deliverables. My name wasn't on patents or equity documents, but my fingerprints were all over the engine of that company. Still, I left cleanly. No drama. No bridges burned. Just methodical execution. In those last 2 weeks, I transitioned my responsibilities with surgical precision. I held handover sessions, delivered detailed documentation, walked through edge cases. Every process I had touched was transitioned perfectly. Not because I owed it to Brandon, but because I wanted zero excuses. I wasn't going to be anyone's scapegoat when things started falling apart. Then, I walked out the door. My first week at Arento Tech was like stepping out of a storm shelter into clear blue skies. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by professionals who weren't running on caffeine, ego, and chaos. Clara was deliberate, organized, and transparent. Every meeting had a purpose. Every task had clarity. People respected each other's time. It was a company that valued sustainability, not burnout disguised as hustle. They brought me in for one reason: a product they had been quietly developing behind the scenes, a logistics platform designed to modernize supply chain coordination for mid-sized vendors. Sound familiar? It should. Virion had been trying to crack the exact same market. The problem was, Virion was trying to retrofit a Frankenstein stack of legacy tools, band-aids, and brute force. Arento Tech was starting fresh. And here's the thing, I knew exactly where Virion's product was weakest. I never shared anything proprietary, nothing confidential crossed the line. But my experience, my knowledge of what did not work, what caused delays, what kept failing compliance testing, what frustrated clients, what integration points were flawed, those insights were mine. I had lived them. And at Arento Tech, I was finally allowed to apply what I knew without having to fight egos or navigate passive-aggressive territorialism. In 2 weeks, I helped the Arento Tech team redesign their rollout roadmap. We pushed forward with a staged pilot, implemented feedback loops, and worked closely with beta clients, 3 of which I helped recruit from my professional network. When we launched, the platform ran clean. Stable. Intuitive. The feedback from early users was overwhelmingly positive. That same week, we made it public, Arento Tech was entering the logistics platform market. 2 days after our announcement, I got a text from a former coworker at Virion, just a screenshot of an email. It was from Virion's largest client. The one I had spent 8 months closing. The subject line said contract termination. They were leaving. For us. By noon, my LinkedIn exploded with notifications. At 4 p.m., Clara walked into my office with a bottle of champagne and a smile. She said we earned it. I sat there for a few seconds, just staring at the bottle. It wasn't just about the money, or the promotion, or the sudden attention. It was the validation. I wasn't imagining it. I was worth more. I was instrumental. I had been underestimated. The next day, word got around that Brandon had called an emergency all-hands meeting. According to one of my former team leads, he blamed the market. He blamed global conditions. He called it a moment of industry disruption and insisted that Virion would bounce back stronger. But he never mentioned me. Not once. He couldn't. Because everyone already knew the truth. I had been the backbone of his operation. And when I left, I didn't sabotage a thing. I didn't need to. I had already given Virion my best. And that was exactly why my absence unraveled it. What Brandon failed to understand is that when you build a company on the backs of people you take for granted, those people do leave, and they take the future with them. He underestimated me, and it cost him dearly. About a month after Arento Tech's product launch, the one that sent Virion into full-blown crisis mode, I got a letter. It wasn't congratulatory. It was from Virion's legal team. The language was stiff and dramatic, like it had been written by someone who thought they were in a courtroom TV drama. They accused me of stealing proprietary information. They accused me of violating a non-compete clause. They claimed I had materially damaged the company's market position by leveraging internal knowledge for the gain of a direct competitor. The letter was 6 pages long and read like a tantrum in legalese. For a moment, my stomach sank. I had done everything by the book. I had walked away clean. I had been meticulous. But this felt personal, and I knew Brandon. He was the kind of man who would rather burn the house down than admit he lost. Still, I was nervous, for about 2 seconds. Clara's legal team was another story entirely. Arento Tech didn't play around. I forwarded the letter to them, and they responded with precision and speed that made my head spin. They analyzed every claim line by line and prepared a formal rebuttal that was brutal. First, they pointed out that Colorado had updated its employment laws just last year, rendering most non-compete clauses unenforceable for employees below a certain compensation threshold. I hadn't even known about that clause in my original contract because, surprise, it had been buried in boilerplate with no specificity or acknowledgement. Even if it had been enforceable at the time, I was in the clear by state law. Then, they pulled out documentation, time-stamped and sourced, showing that the work I had contributed to at Arento Tech was based entirely on my personal expertise, publicly available information, and standard industry practices. Nothing I had touched at Virion was proprietary in a way that would have even applied, and they knew it. The kicker, though, was when our legal team included copies of emails Brandon had personally sent during my offboarding, the ones where he had vaguely thanked me for my thorough documentation and clean transition and noted there were no outstanding concerns. His own words contradicted his legal threat. And we didn't just send a response. We filed a motion of our own, for defamation and workplace harassment. Clara and her team were done playing defense. They saw through the tactic. It was never about protecting intellectual property. It was about intimidation, retaliation, and revenge. Brandon was angry that I had not only left, but succeeded. He wanted to punish me for it. Within 3 weeks, it was over. Virion dropped the complaint with no fanfare. No press. No apology. Just silence. A former coworker, one of the few I still kept in touch with, called me the following weekend. He had just come from a meeting with the remaining leadership team. According to him, Brandon had been completely blindsided by how quickly things escalated. The board had been furious when they found out he had initiated legal action without consulting them. The legal fees were stacking up fast, investors were asking pointed questions, and Brandon couldn't spin it anymore. He had made a personal vendetta into a financial liability. And in the world of startups, liability is poison. That same week, news spread internally that Brandon was stepping down as CEO. But that wasn't the surprise. The surprise came later, quiet, off the record. Apparently, during the board's internal review, something else had surfaced. Brandon had been funneling company funds, actual capital, into a side project. It was supposed to be a stealth mode innovation lab, but in reality, it was a pet idea he had pitched to a few friends that never materialized. No oversight. No formal approval. No deliverables. Just a trickle of funds that turned into a river. There were rumors that it had started small, a few grand here and there for consultants and early-stage development. But over time it ballooned. By the time the board caught on, there were 6 figures that couldn't be explained in the budget. And none of it had ever been disclosed. They acted fast. He didn't even get a public goodbye. Just a vague memo from the board about strategic leadership changes. No thank you for his years of service. No LinkedIn post celebrating the next chapter. Just gone. In the weeks after, I kept thinking back to the version of Brandon who laughed in my face when I asked for a raise. The man who told me to be grateful. The man who thought I was replaceable, forgettable, dispensable. He had the power, the title, the spotlight. And he used it to inflate his own ego while the people doing the real work held the place together. When I left, I took nothing but my knowledge. My experience. My insight. He tried to weaponize that against me, and it backfired in a spectacular, public, and irreversible way. I never knew about that. Last week, something happened that brought everything full circle in a way I never expected, but completely welcomed. Arento Tech officially acquired Virion Systems. Yes, you read that right. The same Virion that once dismissed me, the same Virion where I gave 5 years of my life building processes, closing deals, and keeping projects from derailing while being underpaid and overlooked. The same Virion whose CEO had laughed in my face when I asked for a raise. That company. Now it's ours. It all started with whispers. Internal chatter. A few months after Brandon's not-so-glorious exit, I started noticing odd things, budget shifts, increased requests for financial modeling, Clara attending closed-door meetings with the board more frequently. At first, I thought we were eyeing expansion into a new vertical or preparing to absorb a smaller tech startup to complement one of our product lines. Then one morning, Clara called me into her office. She said she wanted to loop me into something confidential. Strategic. I sat down and she laid it out. Arento Tech was preparing to acquire Virion Systems. Turns out that after Brandon's implosion, the investor confidence never recovered. The client loss I had inadvertently triggered had been a domino effect. Virion's pipeline dried up. Retention dropped. Internal morale plummeted. And worst of all, nothing meaningful got shipped for 6 months. The board knew they weren't going to survive another funding round without slashing valuation or giving up majority control, so they did what most venture-backed startups do when their leadership tanks the company: they looked for an exit. Arento Tech had the cash. More importantly, we had the strategic advantage. We didn't need Virion's product. We didn't even need their talent. But there were a few valuable contracts still under their name, and more than that, acquiring them meant eliminating future competition and absorbing infrastructure we could streamline. Clara told me the board had greenlit the acquisition, and it was happening. And then came the part that made my heart thump: she wanted me to lead the integration. Not just as a project manager, but as the head of the entire transition team. Full authority. I would oversee departmental reviews, system migration, staff interviews, and all final decisions on what stayed and what went. Clara said I had earned it, every bit of it. So a week later, I walked into Virion's headquarters. It was surreal. Same building. Same parking lot. Same glass entry doors I had once pushed open every morning at 8 a.m., coffee in hand, mentally prepping for chaos. But this time, I walked in wearing an Arento Tech badge and a tailored navy blazer, leading a cross-functional team of seasoned professionals. My team flanked me: legal, HR, systems, product leads, all prepared for a 2-week integration sprint. Every one of them looked to me for direction. I walked through the lobby with confidence. The security guard recognized me and gave a hesitant smile. When the elevator doors opened to the 3rd floor, I stepped out into familiar territory. The layout hadn't changed. Desks in the same place. Whiteboards still filled with half-erased notes. And people, some I remembered, some new, looked up from their monitors and just stared. The reactions were varied. Some faces lit up with recognition and, surprisingly, genuine happiness. A few stood up and walked over to shake my hand. One of my former interns, now a junior manager, actually laughed and said, "Of all the full-circle moments, this is the wildest." A few people just nodded silently, probably wondering if their department would survive the integration. Others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure of where they stood. But it was the moment I stepped into the conference room, Brandon's old conference room, that really hit me. I sat at the head of the table. Clara joined via video. My name was on every agenda slide. And for the next 4 hours, I led a transition kickoff with Virion's remaining department heads, laying out timelines, deliverables, and restructuring plans. Some of the leadership team had already been replaced or phased out, but a few familiar faces remained. They watched me carefully. There was no hostility, just silent recognition that I was no longer someone to be ignored. By the end of the week, I had restructured their client services pipeline, greenlit offers to retain top performers, and sunset departments that had become bloated without purpose. I sat in one-on-ones with team leads, answered questions, gave feedback, and pulled no punches. I made sure good people had a place at Arento Tech. The ones who had held things together through the chaos, the ones I used to pull all-nighters with, they deserved better. And now, I could give that to them. A few of my old coworkers privately messaged me after the first few days. Most were kind. Supportive. Some admitted they regretted not leaving when I did. A couple had already jumped ship months earlier and were now quietly asking if I had openings. I forwarded their names to our recruiting team. And Brandon? He was nowhere. I didn't expect to see him. But I did hear about him. Apparently, after being ousted with zero severance and effectively blackballed from every reputable venture fund, he tried to reinvent himself. He launched a podcast about startup culture and grit. He made a big show of it on social media, polished headshots, motivational captions, LinkedIn posts about lessons from the trenches. It fizzled fast. The podcast barely cracked a few hundred listeners. Sponsors dropped out. The last episode aired a month ago. The domain is now parked. No one misses him. Now, I sit on the senior leadership team at Arento Tech. I work directly with Clara on product strategy. I mentor a cohort of junior project managers who remind me so much of my younger self, eager, bright, willing to go the extra mile. Only this time, they're properly paid, respected, and given opportunities to grow without begging for it. And yes, Clara gave me another raise. It wasn't even something I asked for. She just said it was overdue. So to recap, I asked for a 15% raise and was told to be grateful. I left, got a 30% pay bump, equity, and a leadership role. I helped launch a product that leapfrogged the one I had been denied resources for. I watched as the company that once ignored me lost its biggest client, tanked its valuation, and crumbled under poor leadership. Then I returned, through the front doors, at the helm of the acquiring company, to clean up the mess. And now I'm the one calling the shots. All because someone once laughed in my face when I asked to be valued.